completely puts us on another planet as far as what our relations can be, not only with God, but with one another. For one thing, we suddenly have to be responsible for our own wrath, our own distress, because if it's not in God, it's all here, and we have to be responsible for it in ourselves and with each other. So it completely and utterly alters the entire picture, which is when I read that in Julian and began to take in the implications of what that might be, and it's extraordinarily far-reaching, to put it in an understated way. So yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that comment, because that does change everything.
Alison.
Do you think it's less than a case of God is angry with me and more a case of I am at odds with God?
Yes. Yes. Yes, quite. It it really is, what's our problem with God and not what's God's problem with us. That's exactly it. That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
You were talking a bit in your presentation about you drew attention to Julian's fidelity to the teaching of Holy Church, and then you highlighted the way in which her personal revelation, or the showings that she received in person, appeared to be the Lord saying, I am the one that Holy Church preaches and teaches, even though from time to time the message gets garbled in the way that political situations, human relationships, human interests can occlude the light of truth. Can you see any dangers in appearing to not to privilege, but to emphasize, I suppose, the worth of private revelation over corporate discernment, particularly in the light of what you've also said about the nature of religious communities and submission to the community and the will of the community rather than the individual? Could you perhaps comment on that a bit?
Oh, that's a great question. Yes, and it's a vexed question. It's a delicate question, indeed. And my short answer to that would be, how does it square with the gospel? How does a private revelation such as was given to Julian, how does that square with the gospel as we have it? What Jesus is actually doing and saying and acting, and then to hold up and say, well, what is in relation to, and then one can also say, is Holy Church actually acting and saying and speaking in accordance with what we read in the gospel itself? And I think that is always the oh heavens, that's always the comparative piece that we need. We need to hold up whatever private revelation we have, or whatever public discernment that we have as church, hold it up to what is Jesus doing? Who is Jesus? What is Jesus doing? What are Jesus' intentions by what we see there in the gospel? And I think that's the short answer of how to go about that, how to navigate that question, because it is a really good one. Holy Church has to think together and has to consider together, and it's not good when one bit of Holy Church goes rogue, and it always has to be held up to the template of the gospel and Jesus who actually is the gospel. So
that's really helpful, thank you. One of the things that I sometimes find interesting when we welcome groups here at St Julian's, particularly groups who maybe aren't from a particularly churched background or an informed Christian background, is that if they know anything about Julian, it will tend to be along the lines of a sort of binary of, Julian preaches nice, loving, friendly God, church preached and preaches difficult, judgmental, angry God who also is the headmaster and your boss when they're in a bad mood. And actually kind of trying to undo people's sense of that bind and point out that Julian emerges within a Christian tradition. And actually what she says, is largely there in things like Romans chapter 8, for instance, or some of the Johannine texts. Actually, sometimes people can be quite surprised at, that actually, we as Christians validate Julian, if you like, against the sort of litmus test of the Christ of the Gospels. So that's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Jill.
Thank you. Yes, on from the wideness of the discernment of the church, and to looking at a personal reaction, that how often thinking about how God or Jesus might look at me, there's often a light and humorous touch, and I laughed out loud when you were saying with the woman of the well, to our imperfect solutions, and therefore to my railing against something, with the sin of impatience or sloth or doubting fear or despair or something, that Jesus says, so how's that working out for you? And it was the way you said it, because a lot of the time, and if I'm honest, I'd say, well, not very well actually, and that's why I'm complaining, and it's because I've not waited, or I've not held it up to the light of the gospel. I've not held up my answers perhaps to the light of the gospel or the depth of the love of God. But there's just this light touch about it as well, when God is, when God teaching it, that God doesn't want to humiliate us. We are humbled but not humiliated in the modern sense of the word, I think.
Yes, that's exactly right. And just to say that, we don't get let off. We don't get let off. We're Jesus is purifying us to the down to the nth atom. And but as Julian says, he shows us our sin only by the light of his blessed fair countenance. So he's going to show us, where we are in need of reformation, of healing. And she does speak so much in terms of healing and cure, and not in terms of moral categories. So on the one hand, we're not going to be let off, but on the other hand, as you say, Jesus is not going to humiliate us, but he's going to gently and again humorously, I think we miss a lot of the humor in the gospel, bring us to that place where we can trust him and trust his working. And I noticed after chapter 51, after Julian is given the revelation of, the parable of the Lord and the servant, how many times the word gently or gentle appears in her writing. It's an enormous amount of times. And so, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Elaine.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that again, because this evening at 7:30 we've got a study group and we're studying chapter 51. We've got to that point. And when I first read it, I thought to myself, for goodness sake, why is God standing there and saying, this is my lovely servant who hasn't done any wrong? Why doesn't God get that servant out of the hole? Rather than pontificating about, what a good servant he is. And you said that it's the linchpin of all the showings. And I've been pondering on that since you said it, because I don't quite get it. I get it in the sense that, as Julian goes on to explain that it's Christ who has been eager to do the Lord's will and has rushed off and fallen down, and is there on our behalf. And yes, God will take the servant and bring him back and give him honor. But I think maybe I need to, I'm asking you the question, but I know that really I need to wait to hear the answer, and it will come to me. But I just wondered if there was anything else that you could say that might just give us a little clue.
I suppose you could start pulling the little string of Julian's wonderment. Her constant wonderment is how God sees us in our sin. How does God how are we in relation to God? Does he, are we the nasty creatures that some traditions, are we? Yeah, et cetera. I'm thinking of a few in specific, but so that's Julian's, the point of Julian's incessant questioning is, how does God see us? And in that picture of the Lord and the servant, she gets a comprehensive picture of God, as with looking upon us with pity and not with blame. And that, however we got into the mess that we got into, however we became toxic to ourselves and to each other, that's beside the point of how God sees us, how God, we fell. Julian, and the most wonderful thing about that parable is when Julian is relating it, she doesn't go into specifics about how we fell or why we fell. Here we are in this mess. And so her main concern is what God thinks of us, and she gets that, in Julian's understanding that the servant is Christ and the servant is Adam together, that there can be no separation between Adam and Christ. And that says everything.
And I think that my impatience says something as well, because actually what I hear is, well, maybe, and yourself, Elaine, that God doesn't always haul you out straight away. Actually, often, you have to wait quite a long time until you come to the place where you're able to be hauled out. And that's another aspect of the graciousness and mercy of God, really.
Really, and Julian says in another part of her, I can't remember which chapter it is, but we can sometimes learn a lot more by not being hauled out instantly. If you think of times in your own life where you learned a lot more by having to deal with whatever mess you were in, and having to chunter along until you were at a place where you could begin to process what was happening. I can't remember how Julian puts it so much better, but she does. She says sometimes the mother allows her child to flounder and to fall and to, she backs up and just hangs back and lets the child begin to figure it out. And we learn a lot more that way, because the whole I think Julian is big into education. that Jesus is wanting us to learn to become, grown up. And the only way we can learn is to learn.
Yeah.
Experience and do, and to fall and to get up again. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Muriel. You're muted, Muriel.
I think what you've been saying is wonderful, but I have had a few conversations with more evangelical Christians who are so hooked into the wrath of God, and they'll quote the Old Testament, they'll quote Jesus as well, getting angry. But what I think is important to remember, to me anyway, is that I think if we believe that Jesus was fully human as well as divine, that he grew in his life and his attitude to people, and that he might have got angry with the scribes and the Pharisees, but at the end of his life towards the crucifixion, he was full of tenderness. There was no wrath in him. Forgive them, for they know not what they're doing. So to me, he changed in his life. And I could say that to the evangelical Christians, and perhaps they might get that, but a lot of the time they don't. They say, Julian, that's a lot of nonsense. Of course God gets angry. Look at the state of the world, blah, blah. So it is a challenge to speak to people who are not into this way of seeing God, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's a good point. Imagine this scenario. A small child runs out into the middle of a busy street and there's a lorry coming. What is the mother going to do? The mother is going to run out into the street and yank the child out of the street and probably give him a good talking to and saying, don't run into the street. Is that an excess of anger, or is that an excess of love?
Mm.
When her reaction to the child's running out into the street is pretty extreme and pretty loud and pretty abrupt. And that's not I would say, an expression of anger, but an expression of extreme care, motherly care. And I suspect that's, what in Jesus' exasperation with the powers that be, I think comes into that category. So try that on.
You might say tough love. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you for your comment. That's one thing about that question again that people have is what does it serve if God is the angry one and we are not? It kind of lets us off, doesn't it? And it gives us less, it makes the problem less on our side, and so it does rather let us off. And so but I'm not sure that's that's not, anyway. Yeah.
Got a few more minutes. Anybody else with that? Alison.
I was just going to say, for me, I think it's what works best on my soul. And do I want to be someone who's driven by fear, or actually worked on practically by love, which is, to me, what is the changing thing. And I think if you look at modern day therapies, everyone's going towards self-compassion as the way for transformation, and trying to get rid of shame and trying to get rid of fear. And it's a good thing to do. I mean, I think it misses out aspects like God, but they do that because it works, and because it makes a space for people to be real and to sort of rub up against the real things going on inside themselves. So that, for me, that's a sort of acid test, or what is actually bringing me into contact with the God that is changing me.
That's a really, really good comment. You know, if you look in the Gospels, Jesus doesn't do shame. No, Jesus never does shame. Other people do, but not Jesus. And so that's a really wonderful way to look at it.
Judith.
I was so promising myself I wouldn't say anything this time. Apologies. No, just thinking of what you were saying about the evangelicals and the wrath of God, and the sort of carrot and stick mentality of religion, that you go to heaven or you go to hell. And I feel that God loved us enough to give his son to die on the cross for us. We ought to be trying to do the right thing just because, out of gratitude. And we shouldn't need the carrot and the stick. The gratitude should be enough. That was all, really.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. And I think that I'm glad you bring that up, because I think that the crucifixion, the resurrection, are the ultimate example of Jesus saying to us, so is your way of dealing with this working out? You know, is your way of, you know, is the way we tend to deal with our problems is to beat on them or each other. And you know, we are confronted with Jesus in the Eucharist, Jesus on the cross, Jesus resurrected, saying, so is that really working out for you? And it's a continuous process of reappraisal of our methods. And I think to refuse, you know, I think that's the principal movement of Jesus. Jesus from the cross is asking us, is your murder of me really getting you anywhere? And inviting us to extrapolate that across our relationships with others.
I think we've got time for one more question. So Glenys. You're muted, Glenys.
We're thinking about God as mother and father, and thinking of the very best of a mother and father. And I know we have free will, and a mother or father, yes, would allow us to stumble, but hopefully just in a small way, so that we can find our own way in very gentle steps, and develop hopefully into a full feeling human being. But I just feel it's helpful, just the vision of God as mother and father, and the best of that can be gleaned for us all.
Yes, thank you. Some of us have been so fortunate to have good examples of, you know, good examples, good mothers and fathers who do give us an intimation of what Jesus' motherhood and the fatherhood of, you know, the Holy Trinity might be like, and some of us don't, you know, some of us didn't get that that picture, you know. Some folks did get the wrathful,
the nurturing
parenting, yeah. So in the best of cases, our parents are the first, really the first teachers of us, of how God is and how Jesus is to us, our mothers and our fathers, and in the best cases. So, you know, whatever we can do to support that for mothers and fathers, you know, the better. Because how we think about God is how we think about anything. And our ideas and our understandings about God are often formed very, very early. They do tend to stick. So thanks for that observation. That's a really good one.
Mother Hilary, thank you so much. We are really blessed in our Julian family to have the Order of Julian amongst us, and I'm just really pleased that our contact with you and our relationship with you here in Norwich and with you and with other affiliates across the world is constantly growing, and we really are blessed to have had you speaking to us this afternoon, and thank you very much indeed. I'd really want to encourage anyone who doesn't know about it, the Order of Julian of Norwich website. Mother Hilary and Sister Therese and other affiliates often contribute to a quarterly magazine called Julian's Window. There's a link there in the chat, and you can look at past ones, and often Mother Hilary writes in them, and I know I'll embarrass her saying this, but it's just, you know, so similar to what we've heard this afternoon, and it's such really, really good and helpful stuff about Julian. It's always challenging and always encouraging. So I do really wish to signpost you to that and have a look back at some of the past versions of Julian's Windows. Thank you, Mother Hilary, for your time and all the preparation that you've put into speaking with us today. Really, I'm very, very grateful, and we hope it warms up for you soon. And our prayers for you and Sister Therese and your life in the monastery. And thank you for your prayers for us. I know you pray for the whole Julian family every day, and thank you for your ministry of prayer and strengthening all that we try to do to be Julian presence here. And thank you for your contribution to Julian presence as well.
And thank you so much for inviting me. And can I just make a little commercial for, on our website, if you go down to the bottom, there's the hazelnut, which is little short, very short blogs about Julian and monastic life and Benedictine life. And on the hazelnut are all the best pictures of the monastery and our surroundings, along with a little bit of teaching. So I can commend that to you. And thank you so much for inviting me, Father Bruce. And it's been a delight to see all your small faces there in the squares. And we are with you every day in prayer, as you said. So, and glad to be so. So thank you, and